Well, I'm going to continue to make films, but I'm also going to produce other films and give other young black filmmakers a chance to direct their own films.
Although mystical, magical, or spiritual black sidekicks have had a presence in stories and on screen throughout American history, when Spike Lee used the phrase "the magical Negro" in 2001 to describe this stock character, it finally garnered popularity and cultural recognition.
Somewhat related to the noble savage trope, which typically refers to indigenous characters, the magical or numinous Negro is usually not depicted so primitively as to be called savage, but is deeply related to the underlying idea of someone being wise despite their own heritage.
As a disclaimer, the names of these tropes purposefully use outdated racial language in order to capture the underlying, antiquated racist ideals these characters are based on. While this is a deliberate tactic to keep people aware of the historical roots, we will use these terms as little as possible over the course of this video essay.
In the 2000 sports drama film, The Legend of Bagger Vance, directed by Robert Redford, the magical Negro trope is played out to a T by Matt Damon and Will Smith. The story centers on Randolph Juneau, as he returns home to Savannah, Georgia after World War I. Deeply traumatized, Juneau can't assimilate back into his pre-war life. That life comes knocking when his ex-wife implores him to revive his golf game for an exhibition match she's organizing. Juneau can't manage to get himself to make the turbulent return, and so enters Bagger Vance.
Who's that?
Just me. Just a man trying to find somewhere to rest his tired feet, taking in some of God's glories. For $5 guaranteed, I'm offering you my caddy services.
For $5. You know the winner gets $10,000, the caddy's cut is 10% of that, so that's $1,000.
I take $5 guaranteed.
So, you're a golfer?
No, I don't play golf. Well, you lost your swing. We got to go find it. Now, somewhere in the harmony of all it is, all it was, oof, all it will be. Ooh-wee.
I can't do this.
Hey, you might should just loose your grip up a smidge. You know, a man's grip on his club is like a man's grip on...
That's not what I'm talking about.
I know.
No, you don't.
What I'm talking about is a game. Game that can't be won, only played.
You don't understand.
I don't need to understand. And a soul on this entire earth ain't got a burden to carry he don't understand. You ain't alone in that. But you've been carrying this one long enough. Time to go on, lay it down.
You're leaving.
Yes, sir. Yes, I am.
I need you.
No. No, you don't. Not no more.
Before Spike Lee brought this stereotype back into the limelight, Sidney Poitier's role in the 1958 film The Defiant Ones is often considered the first modern portrayal of this trope.
Needs fixing?
Don't do me any favors.
I ain't doing you no favors, Joker.
Poitier plays Noah, an escaped black prisoner who assists and cares for a fellow white prisoner named Joker, despite constantly enduring his racist remarks and even violence. Chained together at the wrist, they are forced to work together in order to survive the hazards of the South. Implicitly, the story is framed as a learning experience for Joker, while Noah is burdened with leading him along this journey of moral growth.
Time's gonna come, Joker. The time's gonna come.
Black characters placed in this role typically exhibit behaviors reminiscent of other old racist stereotypes, such as the Uncle Tom or the happy slave. And although this is by definition a character trope, it mainly functions as a plot device that exists solely to advance the progress and goals of the white protagonist.
I have no name.
These mystical black guides often enter the story inexplicably when the white character is most in need of assistance or a profound realization.
You seek a great fortune, you three who are now in chains. You will find a fortune, though it will not be the fortune you seek. But first you must travel a long and difficult road.
This trope often frames instances of black suffering as noble, brave, or selfless in some way.
Those eyes got a charm. Takes a silver bullet to kill Brutus Jones.
Many of these films include unnecessary sequences that exploit black pain for nothing more than the emotional payoff and guilt felt by the presumably white audience watching. And although to the white gaze, the traits of selflessness, wisdom, loyalty, and supernatural gifts are supposedly positive in black people, they are simply elements of a subordinating trope disguised as empowerment, and reinforce antiquated, racist notions of blackness.
Don't think you are. Know you are.
The most egregious use of this trope appears in The Green Mile.
I'm in heaven.
Based on the Stephen King novel of the same name, The Green Mile follows the interactions between death row guards and inmates in a 1930s Louisiana prison. The story is portrayed as a recollection of events from the point of view of Paul Edgecombe, the supervisor of the block, and specifically focuses on his relationship with a black prisoner named John Coffey, who is sentenced to death for the murder of 2 young white girls. We come to learn that John possesses magical healing powers, which are solely used for the benefit of his white prison guards. And although it is eventually revealed that he has been wrongfully convicted of these crimes, the resolution of the film sees John needlessly executed despite his innocence.
Dead man!
John Coffey's introduction into the story is conveyed to the audience in a series of shots that are hyperfixated on his body. John's race and physicality are made to seem immediately threatening to the men in charge of him and to those watching on screen. The guards' obvious panic regarding his appearance, however, subsides as soon as John Coffey speaks.
I can talk.
Your name is John Coffey.
Yes, sir, boss. Like to drink. Only not spelled the same.
Oh, you can spell, can you?
These introductory scenes blatantly racialize his low intellect in contrast with his massive stature and high emotional sensitivity.
Do you leave the light on after bedtime?
John's simplicity is treated as an endearing quirk. At the same time, it is also used to justify his exploitation. Foisting a childlike ignorance and docile demeanor onto John's character diminishes the threat of his physical and mystical powers, which allows the white characters to maintain their dominance through intellectual superiority, as if their jobs as prison guards didn't already establish their control over his literal life and death.
Is he retarded, you figure?
Looks like they send us an imbecile to execute.
Interestingly, the first time John uses his powers on screen appears over an hour into the film. Paul, who has been suffering from a painful UTI up until this point in the movie, collapses on the floor clutching his groin. John's voice rings out from the direction of his cell.
Boss, I need to see you down here.
What do you want, John Coffey?
John grabs Paul, pulling him close to the bars and placing his hand over the guard's crotch. Both actions are deliberately portrayed as menacing acts of violence, and additionally poses an unspoken threat to Paul's sexuality. Nonetheless, Paul later finds that his infection has been magically cured.
What did you just do to me?
Not only can Paul now urinate free of pain, but his libido has also been miraculously restored as a result of John's powers. In the following scene, Paul goes home to his wife, where they proceed to have sex 4 times in the course of the night. What may seem to be a bit of comic relief to the casual viewer is actually a reproduction of the insidious centuries-old stereotype that paints black men as rampant, hypersexual criminals.
Not that I'm
complaining. But we haven't gone 4 times in one night since we were 19.
Through a simple touch, it is insinuated that John has magically transferred some of his own black hypersexuality to Paul, in addition to curing his illness. The other major scene where John uses his powers in this film also happens to be centered around healing a white person. A side plot throughout the film follows the prison warden and his struggle to cope with the inevitable death of his wife Melinda, who is suffering from terminal brain cancer.
I can't think how to tell my wife. She's going to die.
When the situation becomes desperate, Paul and the other guards conspire to break John out of prison for the purpose of healing her. They do so, however, without consulting John in any way. But through the mysterious mechanisms of spiritual folk wisdom, John once again intuits his role and the intentions of the white people exploiting him.
John, you know where we're taking you tonight?
Hipper lady?
That's right. But how do you know?
Don't know. Tell the truth, boss. I don't know much of anything. I never have.
This scene is an incredible display of the folk wisdom paradigm at its absolute worst. It suggests that John is supposedly too stupid to use his powers without the direction of white men, but is somehow smart enough to know that he is responsible for healing a woman he has never even met. The alternative and equally racist explanation is that John consciously chooses to reserve his powers to heal his oppressors, and is more concerned with their safety and survival than his own. While a simple touch was enough to heal Paul of his ailment, John kisses Melinda full on the mouth in order to literally suck the cancer out of her body. This kiss, although not explicitly sexualized, panders to white American anxieties surrounding interracial sex. The beginning of the scene shows John peeking through a crack in the door, almost as if he were a rapist, and his whispers to Melinda, although meant to be comforting, have an unmistakably predatory tone.
You be still now. You be so quiet, so still.
John's acts of healing are also inextricably linked with his own suffering. In order to use his gift to help others, he must absorb their agony to bear himself.
He's hurting, Dean. He's hurting bad.
This particular characteristic has led scholars, critics, and likely anyone who has seen this movie to draw comparisons between John Coffey and Jesus Christ. They even share the same initials. In his Christ-like duties, John is not only responsible for curing the bodily afflictions of others, but is also tasked with feeling and fixing their moral wrongs.
You're a bad man.
His role as a martyr figure and magical emotional lightning rod provides ample opportunity to turn images of black pain and trauma into a meaningless spectacle. These so-called tearjerker moments are rarely nuanced, humanizing, or even necessary to the plot, but go to extremes so that white people can pat themselves on the back for feeling compassion for a black character.
You tell God the Father it was a kindness you done. I want it to be over and done with. I do. I'm tired of all the pain I feel in here in the world every day. There's too much of it.
The Green Mile takes this exploitative approach to a whole new level by representing its magical black hero not only as a willing instrument for his white superiors, but by conveying his execution as a merciful act that relieves John Coffey of his eternal suffering and grants Paul Edgecombe a sense of moral salvation.
Another Stephen King adaptation, also set in the confines of a prison, written by the same writer-director as The Green Mile, features a somewhat subverted approach to the magical black sidekick. The widely heralded 1994 film, The Shawshank Redemption, makes important and illuminating departures from the original trope through the adoption of an almost buddy pick premise. The film begins in 1947, with local Portland banker Andy Dufresne being convicted of murdering his wife and her lover. His conviction sends him to Shawshank State Penitentiary to serve 2 consecutive life sentences. There, he befriends Ellis "Red" Redding, played by Morgan Freeman. It is quickly revealed that Red is the guy who can get it for you.
I understand you're a man that knows how to get things.
I'm known to locate certain things from time to time.
So, Andy employs Red to get him a small rock hammer and then later a poster of Rita Hayworth for his cell wall. The film is narrated by Red and largely tracks his observations of Andy's experience at Shawshank from beginning to end.
I could see why some of the boys took him for snobby. He had a quiet way about him, a walk and a talk that just wasn't normal around here. He strolled like a man in a park without a care or a worry in the world. Like he had on an invisible coat that would shield him from this place. Yeah, I think it would be fair to say I liked Andy from the start.
Always available for support, Red's character is the great listener, witness, and narrator to Andy's journey. Even leading up to prison, we have a clear idea of Andy's backstory, his family, crime, guilt, and who he was in his previous profession.
Shit, you're a Rembrandt.
You know, the funny thing is, on the outside, I was an honest man, straight as an arrow. I had to come to prison to be a crook.
We hear about his trials, challenges, and achievements, as well as his emotional status, growth, and setbacks.
Ever bother you?
I don't run the scams, Red. I just process the profits. It's a fine line, maybe, but I've also built that library and used it to help a dozen guys get their high school diploma. Why do you think the warden lets me do all that?
Keep you happy and doing the laundry.
With their friendship mostly serving as a vehicle for exposition of the white protagonist, this instance of a mystical, sagacious, black sidekick basically leaves us with a very one-sided version of another Hollywood favorite, the buddy film. In contrast to the extensive presentation of Andy's personhood, only one pithy line addresses Red's life before incarceration.
Why'd you do it?
I'm innocent, Red. Just like everybody else here. What are you in for?
Murder. Same as you.
Innocent?
Only guilty man in Shawshank.
While Andy's character is certainly less inept than the typical white male lead in need of transcendent assistance, over the course of their friendship, Red's most valuable purpose is restricted to his ability to procure for Andy the supplies he ultimately uses to escape prison. The day before his escape, Andy tells Red about his dreams of life after incarceration.
I'll tell you where I'd go. Zihuatanejo.
So,
Zihuatanejo. It's in Mexico. Red? If you ever get out of here, do me a favor.
Sure, Andy. Anything.
There's a big hayfield up near Buxton. You know where Buxton is?
There's a lot of hayfields up there.
One in particular. It's got a long rock wall with a big oak tree at the north end. It's like something out of a Robert Frost poem. If you ever get out, find that spot. At the base of that wall, you'll find a rock that has no earthly business in a Maine hayfield. There's something buried under it I want you to have.
What, Andy? What's buried under there?
After his epic break from prison, using the alias he conjured for the warden's money laundering, Andy meticulously pursues his dream and voyages south to live the remainder of his life in bliss.
And came out clean on the other side. Andy Dufresne, headed for the Pacific.
Sometime later, after 40 years behind bars, Red is finally released from Shawshank, though he struggles to adjust to life on the outside. Red finally decides to follow Andy's instructions and find his buried box. In it, he discovers money to buy bus tickets and a letter inviting him to join his friend on the beach. Interestingly enough, Morgan Freeman's character was not originally African American in Stephen King's story, but rather a red-haired Irish American. Initially, the role was supposedly to be cast with Harrison Ford, Robert Redford, or Paul Newman, but Morgan Freeman's gift for narration ultimately secured him the role. Even though the casting of Morgan Freeman in place of a white actor may seem innocuous or even progressive to some, the change does in fact make a difference in how the audience and filmmakers perceive the roles and actions of the main characters. The main point is that simply changing the color of a character's skin is not in fact a simple maneuver at all, and actually, when glossed over, can lead to racialized implications such as the numinous black character tropes. The ending of Shawshank Redemption provides a very satisfying reunion when Red reaches Andy on the bright beaches of Mexico. As the pair is reconciled, the general sentiment the audience feels is that Andy's hope throughout the film has reignited Red's belief in life and redemption. This ending does indeed subvert the usual parameters of the trope because it is Andy who rescues Red from a life determined by institutionalization. The conclusion does not absolve the film from its problematic portrayal of blackness because, as we know, Red's role still perpetuates the norm that black characters are valued only in their capacity to aid their white counterparts. In this way, black characters are reduced and robbed of the complexity and independence afforded to the white protagonists. The part of Red is still extremely limited in range because all his meaningful action relies almost entirely on the actions of the main white character. The movie camouflages the way in which the two main characters' relationship merely upholds historic racial power imbalances of the established social hierarchy. It says, solving any old regular white person's problems and validating their well-being and emotions is a more important endeavor than doing the same for black people.
The trope appears in a myriad of other films in characters like Bubba from Forrest Gump.
Sit down if you want to.
What's happening to me?
Breathe into the bag, Jack.
Or Cash in The Family Man. One of the most notorious cases occurs in the comedic hit Bruce Almighty and its sequel Evan Almighty, where Morgan Freeman literally plays the role of God.
Yeah, it is for most people. Spend their lives in the dark, trying to hide from me. You must be Bruce. I've been expecting you.
Often, more subtle cases of magical black characters appear in supporting roles of science fiction films, such as The Adjustment Bureau.
All right, let's get him back on track.
Are you an angel?
We've been called that. We're more like case officers, who live a lot longer than humans.
Why are you helping me?
I have my reasons.
So what's the solution? How do we stop heinous misrepresentations of black characters, and by extension, black people, from gracing our screens? The first and most important step is to follow Spike Lee's call to support black filmmakers as they create authentic representations of blackness. Second, we must establish awareness of the mechanisms and effects of these stereotypes, like this satirical Key and Peele sketch, which turns the trope on its head by making the peripheral, magical characters the subjects of their own conflict.
Here to fix the copier?
Yes, sure. Hey, how did you...
Sometimes things ain't really broken. It's the way we treat them that needs to be fixed. Well, if it isn't Mr. Stanley, Carl. You need to find your own troubled white boy.
Lastly, stop expecting black folks to unfairly provide support or service work for others, especially for those of us who are white.
Good Lord. Are you all right? Well,
I guess sometimes things have to come apart before we can put them back together again.
Oh, you're a magical Negro too.
Who you call a Negro, bitch?